So when you think about a law made to take down the mob, who do you picture? Probably not a group of protesters, right? But what if I told you the very same law could be used against both? Today, we're diving into the pretty wild and controversial reach of the RICO Act. Okay, so on one hand, you've got the classic image of organized crime. This is the whole reason the RICO Act was even created. But on the other hand, you've got organized citizen activist groups. I mean, on the surface, you couldn't get two more different groups. Which leads us to the big puzzle of this whole story. How in the world can a single law, one that was forged to bring down criminal empires, also be pointed at political and social movements? Well, to figure that out, we've got to get to know the law itself. All right, so let's unpack the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You probably know it by its much punchier acronym, RICO. It's a name that carries a ton of weight, and believe me, for a very good reason. Passed back in 1970, RICO was a legal bombshell. Seriously, it gave prosecutors this revolutionary new tool. See, instead of just going after people for single crimes, they could now target an entire organization for a whole pattern of criminal behavior that was run through an enterprise. And I want you to burn those two words into your brain, pattern and enterprise, because they are the absolute key to everything that comes next. You know, a really good way to think about it is like a legal Swiss Army knife. It was designed for one big job, sure, but because it's so versatile, it can be used in all sorts of surprising and really powerful ways. So, what does it actually take to prove a RICO violation? Well, it really just boils down to these two things. First, you need an enterprise. And notice how crazy broad that definition is. Just a group of people with a common purpose. It doesn't have to be some formal company. It could just be a loose group of associates. And second, you need a pattern of racketeering. That just means committing at least two related crimes, we're talking things like extortion or arson, within a 10-year window. That's the whole framework. Okay, now let's get to the case that stretched this framework to its absolute breaking point, taking this law into territory its creators probably never, ever imagined. The case is the National Organization for Women versus Scheidler. It hit the Supreme Court in 1994, and what they decided would completely change the game for activism and the law, setting a precedent that people are still arguing about today. So the fight here was pretty intense. The National Organization for Women, or NOW, argued that these anti-abortion protest groups, led by a guy named Joseph Scheidler, were basically acting like a criminal enterprise under RICO's definition. The goal? To shut down clinics. But Scheidler's group fired back, saying, hey, we're a protest movement, not the mafia. And then they made their key point. They had no financial motive. Everyone just assumed that was the whole point of RICO. And this, right here, is the million-dollar question. I mean, the entire law was built to fight crime syndicates that were driven by profit. So does it even make sense to apply it to a group whose goals are social or political, not money? On the Supreme Court's answer, it was unanimous and absolutely stunning. A flat no. With this one sentence, the court basically said that an economic motive is not a requirement for a RICO violation. An enterprise could have any purpose, political, social, you name it. As long as it was involved in a pattern of criminal acts, it could fall under RICO's incredibly powerful reach. This was a bombshell. As you can imagine, this decision kicked off a huge debate. It led to this argument that the RICO Act had now taken on what some call a supraconstitutional scope. So what on earth does that mean, and why does it matter so much? Yeah, it sounds super complicated, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. It's this worry that a law has just grown so powerful that it seems to be working way beyond its original intended purpose, almost like it's floating above the very framework that created it. So, supraconstitutional scope is basically the term for when a law gets stretched so far through legal interpretation that it starts covering situations its creators never even dreamed of. And that, of course, raises some really big questions about its power and its limits. So, what does this argument actually look like? Well, here's the breakdown. First off, that ruling just blew the doors open, letting RICO be used against any group, not just the ones trying to make money. Second, it changed the focus from why a group does something to just what it does. And finally, and this is the big one, it seriously blurred the legal line between organized protest and organized crime. And that's a distinction a lot of people see as totally essential in a free society. So if we zoom out for a second, you can really see the incredible journey this law has taken. It started as this very specific weapon, designed for a specific enemy, and it morphed into something way, way bigger. You know, this timeline tells the whole story in just two key moments. In 1970, a special tool is created to fight the mob. Then, just 24 years later, a single court ruling completely rewrites the rules on who that tool can be used against, and the fallout from that is still being felt today. And that right there is the core story of the RICO Act. It's a really powerful lesson in how laws can kind of take on a life of their own, leading to consequences that nobody, not even the people who wrote them, could have ever seen coming.
Ultimately, it leaves us with a pretty tough question to chew on. When a law turns out to be effective in ways nobody expected, how do we handle that tension between how useful it is and what it was originally meant for? It's a debate that's still going on, and it's definitely one worth watching.